been falling all my life and people wonder why I'm down to earth.
This is Adversity University.
If you waiting for somebody to feel sorry for you, then you failed already.
Success is best to those who've been grounded first.
Cause ain't nobody gonna feel sorry for you.
Now what are you willing to do?
The only thing that separates a winner from a loser is perseverance.
And this is Adversity University. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another edition, another show of The Art of Growing Through. Now, if you haven't been hiding under a rock, you're familiar with the series, The Art of Growing Through. First series, we did The Art of Growing Through Anxiety. And this time, we're going to do The Art of Growing Through Trauma with licensed therapist Natalie Alexander, extraordinaire. What's up, Natalie? How you doing?
Hi, Cody. I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. And I want to say that I love your intro and that bar. I've been down so much that I'm down to earth. I'm sorry if I missed it, but that's such a bar.
Yeah. I've been falling all my life, so people wonder why I'm down to earth.
I'm down to earth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it's true. It's true, right? And that's even a good segue to just what we're going to be talking about as far as trauma. So just to even elaborate on that bar, as you call it. Again, I've been falling all my life, so people wonder why I'm down to earth. It's definitely a direct statement from the past trauma that I've experienced in my life and have always had to overcome, hence the art of growing through, right? So we have to grow through the things that we actually go through in order to get to the other side, right? So, so welcome to today's topic, the art of growing through trauma. We're going to dive in a lot about trauma. We'll be giving some personal experiences, some experiences from others that we've seen, some educational experiences from our, just from a, learning standpoint and fact standpoint, right? So before I start drifting off too much, a lot of what we'll discuss today is pretty much just kind of defining trauma and what that looks like, right? We will talk about how trauma affects the brain and the body. We'll also talk about the common misconceptions about trauma and the importance of acknowledging and validating personal experiences, which is what I just started with, right? Just talking about, past trauma and me making a statement. I've been falling all my life because I know I'm not alone, right? There's a lot of people who feel and felt as if all they do is fall. But I like to say when you fall, the only way you can go is up, right? So it's not about hitting rock bottom. Hope you never hit rock bottom. Well, sometimes we got to hit rock bottom to understand that it's not comfortable down here. You know what I'm saying? So if it's not comfortable down here, let me do something a little bit different so that I can be something a little bit different. And I'm going to tell you, if anybody that's listening to this have ever experienced rock bottom or hitting the floor and it was hard to get up, as long as you got up, you definitely made a difference for your life, and learn from that experience and learn from that mistake so that all that you do in the future can just be you can be the best, and that experience can be the best while you're on this journey called life. Through this journey, we're going to experience a lot, right? So, Natalie, let me start running my mouth and let's just get into what we came here for.
Let's do it.
So Natalie, for y'all don't know, Natalie is a licensed therapist, licensed professional counselor, licensed in the state of Georgia and Alabama. She's also the CEO and founder of Healing Grace Counseling Services. And I just got to let you know that she is an amazing therapist, which is why she's on this show and why she's also Adversity University Motivator. But we'll get into that later. I had the pleasure of knowing Natalie and knowing, firsthand how valuable she is, not just as a person, but as an actual therapist, and to help guide you and coach you through certain experiences, as well as helping you to connect the dots so that you can see a lot more clear than what you can on your own. And this is why just therapy is just so important for people, period. Having people in your life who is familiar, who mental health professional, who's familiar with assisting you with, the past trauma, the past issues, and the dots that actually needs to be connected. She's one of those people. She's definitely a value resource, and I definitely advise everybody on the sound of my voice to seek her out, and you know, whether you're dealing with personal issues, whether it's relationship issues, whether it's household issues or childhood trauma, she could definitely assist you with connecting these dots. But all right, now that was me, you know what I'm saying, popping your collar a little bit. Now let's dive into, you know, just the art of growing through trauma. So I guess, you know, the first question that I'm gonna just kind of dive into, just generally speaking, in your opinion, your personal opinion, how important is it for individuals to be able to grow through the trauma that they go through?
Well, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for popping my collar, as you say. I really appreciate that. Yeah, my collar is good and stiff and popped. I appreciate it. Right. So it's important for people to grow through their trauma, because if not, they get stuck in their lives, right? A lot of times people are stuck, they're spinning the wheels. Why does this keep happening to me? Why do I keep choosing the same type of guy? Why do I find myself in the situation, or, you know, always down? What's going on? And more times than not, it's connected to your childhood trauma, something you've experienced that you hadn't processed, that you hadn't made sense of and resolved. And so that always becomes the reference point for the decisions that you make moving forward, which inevitably are not the best decisions, because it's connected to the trauma, which was not the best experience that happened, right? I want to mention real quick that there are several definitions and thoughts behind what a trauma actually is. Some people believe that a trauma is what happened to you. And I used to believe that. When I was doing my clinical training, my clinical supervisor explained trauma as an event, that's something that, you know, but that it's significant to or specific to each individual. So what might be a trauma for you might not be a trauma for me, right? And it can vary anywhere. What I've since learned that kind of aligns more with the work that I do is that trauma is not so much only what happened, but it's the interpretation of what happened that becomes the trauma. Because then that's what builds the emotional response inside of your body. And that is what ends up being formed into the trigger. I know I'm kind of speeding up a little bit, but it's really the interpretation of what happened and your body's response to that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. And don't worry about, you don't have to speed anything, you know, take your time, because when we educate people and informing them, we want to be able to give it to them as simplistic as possible, right? So that they can receive it, digest it, and apply it to their lives. You know, we know that you're the expert, but we can't assume that everybody understands. But what you said was definitely clear. I understood you, and you wasn't actually going fast. I just wanted to put that nugget in your head just in case you felt like you had to. Okay. But so I appreciate those examples, because it started connecting a few dots for myself that I just kind of want to just kind of throw it at you and let you speak to it, because you mentioned trauma isn't something that just only the things that happen to us, but just the experience and how we interpret those experiences. And it's that of, you know, young people in negative environments, especially, you know, with what's happening today in today's society, the things that they witness ends up being the things that they become, right? And that's associated to trigger. For example, that's associated with trauma. But for example, you know, you're living in an environment where all you see is fighting, right? As a response to, you know, conflict, right? If you live in that environment, when conflict, you know, presents itself for you, your natural reaction is going to be to what? Fight.
That's right.
If when you see conflict, you know, in your environment, and the first thing that most people do, or everybody that's associated with you do, is go grab a gun, that's associated with trauma, right? Because that's how they interpret, this is how life is supposed to be. This is what I'm used to seeing. this is what I'm supposed to do, as opposed to actually getting, conflict management tools, coping skills and things like that to understand how to resolve conflict and how to resolve situation without physical altercation or even verbal altercations all the time, because that's not always necessary, right? So once we kind of learn how to articulate ourselves, we can speak the things that we actually want to say to a person that may make them seem small, right? But it may make them check themselves in the sense of, dang, this person didn't come at me crazy, but what they said was real, and I feel stupid to try to fight them now. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying, like, that's a small example in a negative space, but that's important because that's kind of what's happening right now, especially in the world that we live in today. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that a little bit as far as those experiences? Because I know you have a lot of experience working with young people as well. So I wanted to kind of plug that in as well.
Right. And so as you were speaking, an example came to mind. There was a young man, when I started my career, it was in adolescent facilities, mm-hmm. Where young males were adjudicated and they had to spend 4 months in the facility. So I would have 16 young boys on my caseload. And as you were speaking, this one young man came to mind. I remember he had his certain chair that he liked to sit in. And he told another kid to get up out the chair. And the kid was like, no, I'm not getting out the chair. And the kid was like, get off my chair. I was sitting there first, get out my chair. And the kid was like, I'm not moving. And so the young boy on my caseload punched the kid out the chair. And he got his chair back. And immediately I thought, like, that's what he has learned. He has learned that when you don't do what he tells you to do, he uses physical force to make the thing happen. Yeah. And when we come to, trauma and the things that you've learned and being violent and emotional outbursts and things like that, there's a component of self-control that needs to be implemented. And Cody, you talked about skills and tools to learn to cope and resolve things, a lot of which involves self-control, a lot of which involves being able to self-regulate, know what you're feeling inside, and just control it. Mm-hmm. Everything that happens is not an offense to you. Everything that happens is not something that needs to be taken personally. But we often do. When we have unresolved trauma, we take a lot of things personally. We internalize, we become very, very sensitive because of the trauma that's still living in our bodies. It's like an open wound, right? And a lot of these things, we end up being termed weak or soft or pie, or all the other, synonyms of weak, when really it's just the trauma living inside that has not been addressed or resolved.
Yeah. Now that's real. So I think, because you just kind of mentioned that, I want to segue to a question that we had about, how trauma actually affects the brain and the body. Because you just gave a lot of examples and you just, kind of alluded to the fact that trauma does affect, your brain and your body, because that's where we feel it. That's where we get that urge. And unfortunately, most of the people that kind of react as opposed to responding just was never taught how to actually respond. They don't have the language. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the tools to be able to, present themselves in a better light. Right. But can you speak to how trauma affects the brain and the body?
Yes. Dr. van der Kolk, he is the author of the book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he shares from his research that when an individual experiences trauma, the brain structure actually changes. And when the brain changes, the body responds. So years later, an individual might get sick suddenly. Dr. Nadine Wilson, she's the author of The Deepest Well. Okay. She talks about early childhood experiences that also are a significant factor in sickness later on in life. In her book, the first chapter, she talks about a man who's 40 years old who had a stroke. And when the doctors are trying to examine him, they're like, there were no risk factors. He was healthy in every sense of the medical term. But when they look at his childhood, they see that he experienced a trauma that the body registered and that finally it surfaced when he was 40 in the form of a stroke. So we have to look at childhood traumas and experiences that once we can make a connection to them, we can actually avoid sicknesses later on in life. My favorite trauma expert, Dr. Gabor Mate, he talks about the lifestyle of certain individuals in response to trauma that also predicts illnesses such as ALS, lupus, autoimmune disorders, things of that nature that are rooted in trauma, that are rooted in what the mind interpreted when the incident happened. And as such, we decide we're going to make decisions that align with how the mind interpreted it. And then the body says, okay, well, this is what it is. I hate myself. I don't like myself. I don't want myself. And then the body goes, okay, it starts turning internal, autoimmune, and it starts kind of dying from within, right? All of that to say that a lot of these diseases can be avoided if we deal with the trauma and we address the interpretation of the trauma and create a new narrative that best aligns with the life that we want to live.
Yeah, that's definitely that's real, because I know firsthand, just personally, you know, just even the way I was raised in the environment that I grew up in, and just the nature of just my upbringing, period, from an environmental standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, all these things, right? You experience trauma, right? Mm-hmm. So I lived in trauma. Like that's what that was my space. Like that's kind of where it all started, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, like for those that know me, especially for those that know that part of me, I'm completely like night and day from who I was then to who I am now, right? But it took some time to get there, right? It took a lot of lifelong experiences, you know, being self-aware, having to really try to identify and learn how to, you know, control myself, because lack of self-control was a huge thing in my upbringing, right? The first thing I do is roar, right? Like you got this big roar that you feel like you have to be the biggest thing in the room once you feel like disrespected. And one of my brothers asked me a question. He was just like, you know, man, I've been always wanting to ask you this, but I ain't never really know how to ask you this. And he was just saying, like, why do you or did you respond the way that you always did? Like, why you always felt like somebody tried you or somebody just not respecting you, right? And I had to think about it, man. I was just like, man, you know what? It's a good question. That's a real good question, right? Because you don't really have an answer until you sit down and think about it. Right. And it felt like a therapy session, but it was just two homeboys talking.
Nice.
And the conclusion I came up with was, and this is crazy, it was just like, dang, I always feel disrespected because when I was younger, I never really felt respected.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. That's deep.
So that's deep. That's deep, and it carried on to adulthood. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to say something to what you said about not having the words at the time when he asked the question. When we have experienced trauma, the emotional response to it activates the emotional parts of our brain. And when our emotional part of our brain is activated, we don't have words because the words are in that certain part of the brain. Trying to remember that part.
I don't know it.
And then in any case, broke us. Anyway, that language part of our brain is shut down because the emotional part of our brain is activated. And when we don't take the time to think about what happened, the words won't ever come. we stay here in the emotions, and when we rehearse the emotional parts of it, more emotional responses happen. We have of an imbalance, right? Hence some of these disorders that we're experiencing, because all of this is happening. It's heightened. We have not taken the time to make a decision about what we're feeling, and we don't have the language to explain what we experience. A lot of times people will walk into my office and I'll do the whole limits of confidentiality and ask them, okay, why are you here? And they start to cry. They don't have tears. They don't have words. It's just the tears. Okay. And I have to say this also, that healing from trauma happens in safe spaces.
Yeah.
And that's why I love what you said. It wasn't a therapy session. It was two homeboys talking. Mm-hmm. You felt safe enough to think and process what all of that was about. And your brain allowed you to find the words to explain what all of that was. Why? Because you felt safe.
Yep. No, that's real. No, that's real, man. So listen, everybody, if you're just tuning in, this is the art of growing through trauma. This segment here, we're pretty much going over understanding trauma, and we're just giving and receiving some insight just on just the different layers of trauma, because it's not a one size fit all type of deal. Right. And it's very important to educate and inform the people and the public about these things, man. It's all about mental health education. It's all about mental health motivation, right? So, on the in the lane of talking about, trauma and just even my own personal experiences, we'll hear the word trauma a lot from all different types of, sources, but that don't necessarily mean we know like what it is, right? We really like understand it. We also hear trigger a lot, right? Right. That don't mean we know it. That don't mean we understand it, right? So I think we kind of broke down a few different layers, right? Because, again, not knowing and assuming will lead you to have so many different, misconceptions about a thing, right? So I want to kind of stay there for a minute, but I also want to talk about just some of the common misconceptions as it relates to trauma. And I think you touched on them earlier when you were saying, like, trauma is not just something that happened to you. You know what I'm saying? It's multi-layered, right? And again, it's not a one size fit all. So just in your own words, layman terms, so that a kid can understand it, to a teenager, to a young adult, what in your opinion and your experience, what are some of the most misconceptions about trauma?
That it is something that is easy to overcome. Mm-hmm. Trauma healing is probably one of the most challenging things any of us will ever do. Mm-hmm. A lot of us get on the path to healing trauma, and then instantly it's like, all the anxiety ticks up. There's an uptick in anxiety. There's an uptick of all the symptoms you started therapy for, but that's part of the healing from trauma, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the first misconception, that it's easy and that it's smooth. It's not. The other misconception may be that there's a certain time frame allotted to healing from trauma. Trauma healing can take a month, but it can take several years ongoing because of how deep the impact has been in the body. Once again, trauma is not the thing that just happened, like I was saying earlier. And that's a few of the things that come to my mind specifically when it comes to trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually good, especially with the statement I'm about to make, because when we talk about trauma, right, and there's a lot of people that experience what I'm about to say. There's a lot of people that hadn't experienced that yet. But when you do, you're gonna understand what I'm saying, especially about trauma. So in 2010, I lost my mother in a car accident, right? And because we was talking about, trauma healing is not fast, right? You just think it's a quick thing. So I lost my mom in a car accident. I also in addition to losing in the car accident, my younger sister was actually in that car. You know what I'm saying? With the car accident. So it's kind of twofold, right? So when we talk about like trauma healing and the trauma that, you know, doesn't necessarily happen to us, that happened to me, but not necessarily to me, right? But I lost my mother tragically in the car accident, and my younger sister was actually in the car, and I have an older sister who was with me at the time that it happened, right? So that's about 14 years ago, right? So you talk about 14 years ago, something that happened like that, and you'll think that, okay, well, you know, 14 years, like I've done crossed over that healing patch. I'm pretty much healed from it. I grew through what I actually went through, but in that time, it was like never ending for the first 10 or 11 years. Like I said, 14 years now, but for the first 10 of 11 years, it was always like it just happened yesterday.
Man.
And it was so traumatic for me that nobody really understood. Like a lot of the actions that was happening from me, a lot of the responses, the lack of responses, the isolation, the depression, the anger, all of those. You got to go through the stages of grief, right? But while you're going through the stages of grief, you actually, you lost the person that brought you here. You know what I'm saying? In an abrupt, tragic way, right? So, you know, that healing process, no sooner than 10 years that I was able to heal from 11, actually. I'm gonna say 11. No sooner than that, right? So you say I'm like 3 years post healing at this point, right? That I can speak to it without crying. I can speak to it without getting mad. I can visualize the experience and just appreciate it for what it is, you know, because I'm older now. I've grown. I understand life. And you know, although I would wish you was here, we all got to go that way. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, the experience was so negative and bad for me. It really put me in a space that I'm so glad to be out of it. But I'm saying all that to say it took me a minimum of 11 years to get over something. You know what I'm saying? That actually happened to me. And I still will have, you know, little spouts here and there just because I miss my baby, right? But at the end of the day, you know, it's kind of like these types of experiences can affect us in so many different ways, because it wasn't just the accident that was traumatic for me. It was the conversations that we couldn't have anymore, right? The conversations that we had prior to her passing, the certain experiences that we had prior to her passing, certain promises that were made that you just can't make no more. You know, and then, you know, I brought up my sister. I don't want to kind of forget that, because I told you it took me like 11 years to just kind of even get over it. And, you know, when it happened, my younger sister was going into high school. So it was the summer of the summer before she actually went to the 9th grade.
Gotcha.
Right. So she was so mind you, I hadn't been in the house with her. My older sister hadn't been in the house with her for years. I ain't been in my mama's house since 13, 14 years old. Wow. So my little sister never grew up with me. Right. It was just her and my mama. Right. So she was experiencing a lot, right? And you know, she was doing good in school, and then she started doing bad in school. Right. And then we started, me and my sister, we kind of was getting on her case a little bit. And I remember saying the words, I don't know if I said it to her or if I said it to my older sister, but it was along the lines of basically you using what happened as an excuse to do what you're doing. Probably some of the worst words that came out my mouth ever. I regret it to this day. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, bro, how can you say that?
Right. Right. When we talk about trauma, also, there's a lot that's happening internally that we don't allow ourselves to admit.
Yep.
And when we don't allow ourselves to admit or connect to it, we don't allow anybody else to either. Yeah. So, and empathy is another very important tool to have and to know how to receive and give when we're healing from trauma. Because empathy also provides that safe space. I know what you're feeling, but you can't know what somebody else is feeling, or you can't fathom it or try to imagine it if you haven't allowed yourself to experience it either. Right. Brene Brown talks about empathy also, and vulnerability in her work. So
it's lack of knowledge, lack of growth, right? I hadn't even going through the process myself, let alone I'm able to judge somebody who was actually there and witness all these things. It was just like, okay, man, like that right there, just a young person not knowing better. You know what I'm saying? And you actually trying to guide somebody from a traumatic space, and which is not the best. And it's crazy. And that's also a segue to even speak to like current parents or current older siblings or current just anybody who's trying to guide someone and can't fully understand that person's journey or that person's experiences, but you're judging them based on the fact of where you sit and where you stand, not knowing that you also are broken. So you can't guide somebody from a broken place. You can, but I don't know how well that's going to go over. But you can't judge people for what they're going through when you haven't gone through the journey to understand not only yourself, because in order to understand that person a little bit, you got to understand yourself a lot of it.
Right. But I have a question, because you did mention that you have an athletic past, right?
Yep.
Football, right?
Yep, football,
okay.
Football and track.
Football and track. Okay. Right. And so, just going back to the comment that you made, when we're talking football, we're talking professional football and just the higher levels of the football world. There's no space for, you're on the field, as far as I understand, tell me if I'm wrong, there's no space for, timeouts or like, I can't run this route. You run the route, you're out the game, you're on the bench. There's a level of push through, there's a level of no excuses, there's a level of, I got to make this win and I got to make sure that I show up the way I need to show up so that I stay in the game.
For sure.
And it sounds to me like that verbiage, that comment that you made had more of that kind of motivation behind it.
Absolutely.
Where, like that was your reference point. Yes,
Absolutely.
You had healed, you were going through, but it was like, I mean, you're not coding motivation for no reason, right?
Right.
So it's like, that was your way of motivating or trying to motivate her to stay in the game.
Yep.
And, I offer that so that you don't beat yourself up so much. We know that it was not the best comment to make, but you were at the reference point that you were where you were. It is what it is.
Right.
Hopefully you'll allow yourself to release it. Hopefully she'll release it at some point also.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to offer that insight as far as where you were coming, also the reference point that worked for you. When you pushed through, you did the thing, you didn't use any excuse. It worked for you.
Right.
And so we do for other people what worked for us. We expect them. And to the parents, like what you said, that's not how things go.
Right. And it ain't always about what worked for us, because what worked for me might not work for the next person.
Facts.
And everything makes sense in context, right? So had I expressed that, hey, look, and you put that statement in context, it would have went over better. But when you coming from a aggressive and angry place because you're used to that, right? You're used to it because that's what was drilled into you. That was a learned behavior that was, presented to you. That was your own experience. But if she or anyone else who, in a similar situation, if they never experienced that type of guidance, that type of coaching, that level of being pushed, you don't understand it. You don't understand the context of where the person actually coming from. You're taking it all from face value. And if you're going to take those type of words from face value, it's going to hurt 10 times more because the context wasn't there. You don't understand that the way that this person is talking to you is just a normal way of how athletes in the sports world are being spoken to be able to push and motivate and guide them. right?
Yes.
But they never was in that world. It just seemed like this dude is just yelling at me and cussing at me and is telling me I'm not worth a damn. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm just using an excuse. But you're not used to being pushed in that way. You're not gonna feel it how I feel it. Like me personally, even to this day, I prefer you raise your voice at me a little bit.
Really?
You know what I'm saying? I prefer you give it to me in an aggressive way, because it tells me you passionate about what you're saying to me and it's gonna stick, it's gonna resonate. I get it. Okay, cool. All right, you coming from a place, I need to check out that place. Let me back it up a little bit. And then I go a little bit harder. When you come a little soft to me, it's just like you ain't confident enough to be telling me what I need to be doing.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just it's kind of like, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like that's embedded into, and I think a lot of men respond in similar ways. You know what I'm saying? Which is why there's oftentimes a disconnect between men and women, you know, relationally. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, but everything makes sense with context. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I digress. This ain't no counseling session for me now, and he ain't finna pull me into one.
My bad. I got you, but you said some good things. You dropped some good gems here, Cody.
Nah, for real. But I definitely appreciate your knowledge and your expertise on just helping the audience and helping people understand what trauma is. And we're gonna keep these going. We got about a few more segments of these. But while we, because we're about to wrap in a minute, but I want to speak to, and we kind of spoke to it a lot, and I just did it, right? But just the importance of acknowledging and validating your personal experiences as it relates to trauma, similar to, what I just did, and just coming from me, right? I think that it's just my personal and professional experiences is you open more doors, right? When you put yourself out there in a vulnerable state, right? When you can, acknowledge your own personal experiences and you can articulate those from a positive space, but you're articulating the negative spaces that you were in and why things happened or why you did X, Y, Z, or even why you even credible to even talk to me about anything, right? I think it's important to, acknowledge and validate those personal experiences. But I definitely would want to hear, your opinion on that as far as acknowledging and validating the personal experience of an individual.
So I want to share my experience with trauma and wrap up with the importance of the Adversity University Motivation Support Group, in the sense that I got married, and I was still deeply wounded from my own childhood neglect. And my husband, who is now my ex-husband, also was wounded from his childhood neglect. So when I communicated something that he didn't like, he would shut down. I interpreted that as rejection because my trauma was rejection. Yeah. When I expressed to him something that I didn't like, it could have been anything. He heard that I was criticizing him, which would shut down. He would hear criticism. I would hear rejection. And it just the distance. We tried to hang in there for 18 years. And after that, I was at my wit's end. Like I was in a very, very, very bad place, to the place that even in this moment, I want to cry. We didn't have resources. We didn't have people who could understand trauma, who could understand anxiety, who could see past the behaviors. We didn't have those resources. We didn't have that kind of support. And so now my heart's desire, my passion is to provide that safe space and that support for people to come into a space, come into a room, virtual or in person, to find the support and realize that they're not the only people that have experienced a level of trauma, that we can resonate with each other, we can empathize with each other so that you can stay in connection with yourself and that you can stay in connection with the people that you love and the people that say that they love you moving forward. And that's the type of community that I want to contribute to and develop, because it is that important for you to address your trauma. When you don't, things that, you end up, relationships end. There's a lot of self-harm. There's a lot of self-hatred, self-loathing, all the things that are not healthy. And these are resources. Adversity University Motivation Support Group is a resource that can help you address the trauma that you've experienced, growing through the experience of trauma. So it's just important.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that. That was a good way to definitely wrap. If anybody got anything out of this, definitely put an AU in the chat. Look out for Natalie. Actually, Natalie will be facilitating. She's one of the motivators to facilitate the actual support group, the Women's Core Confidence Circle. And you have two dope therapists that will be leading these actual support group, Kim Peek and Natalie Alexander, but they are amazing. And it is for women. So you can access that. Go to adversityuonline.com. And you can access the support group. If you're watching this on any of my social media, you should see a link that'll direct you. It's either the link in my bio, the link in my bio. Right. If you're on YouTube, I know I'm not on Facebook right now because they keep suspending my account. I'm gonna say that every time. I can't stand them. But definitely, Women's Core Confidence Circle, man, with like-minded individuals to really just grow, heal, and just empower each other, man. That's what it's about. That's what life is about. You're in good hands with Natalie. You definitely will be educated. You definitely will leave with some tools on a weekly basis. It's every Wednesday. And I definitely suggest that you join. It's definitely affordable. Click the link, access the group, join Natalie. Natalie, I definitely appreciate your knowledge and your expertise. You are a real gem, and I appreciate you. And I know that everybody that attends these support groups are definitely going to appreciate you. So it's your boy, Cody Martin, aka Cody Motivation. Remember, knowledge is power, but shared knowledge is more powerful. And perseverance is the key to overcoming all adversity. So never give up. No matter what life throws at you, keep your feet moving, focus on the solution, and let success be the goal. It's Cody and Natalie. We out of here. Till next time.
Thanks, Cody.
When perseverance to meet adversity, then success is right around the corner. You just got to be willing to keep going. This is Adversity University. What's your plan? You gonna keep your feet planted, or you gonna keep your feet moving? And success is the next step. What you gonna do? Adversity University.